Outcomes are just outcomes. They're just telling you what happened under the circumstance.
Good morning. Happy Friday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand and it is perfect. All right. We got a very busy Friday. We're going to dig straight into today's Q&A. This was a discussion with Alex from yesterday's Coffee and Coaches conference call. And we were talking about the delay strategy that's associated with early and what happens when you don't have access to that because you lack relative motion to the pelvis. So real quick, let's just review this. So when we talk about the early representation, if I was to be stepping forward, say with my left leg as such, and the medial heel comes down, first metatarsal comes down, and I have a sacrum that should be moving backwards on the ilium into counternutation, and that's an ER representation of the pelvis. That represents the fact that we do have relative motion available to us. But what if we have the superficial compressive strategies in play? We don't have that relative motion available to us. Now, we still have to create a delay strategy because I have to slow that side down. So as I make contact with the ground, that side of my body is going to have to slow down to allow the other side to advance as I'm stepping forward. So the question is where is this going to show up? How is it going to measure? Are there any other ways that we can identify the compensatory strategy? And so yes, there is. And so this is where our complex movements really come into play and allows us to make comparisons and to identify where these compensatory strategies occur. I'll give you a hint. It's in a squat, but I'm going to let that show up in the discussion as we go through this. If you'd like to participate in a 15-minute consultation, please go to askbillhartman@gmail.com, askbillhartman@gmail.com. Put 15-minute consultation in the subject line. Please include your question in the email, and we will arrange that at our mutual convenience. Everybody have an outstanding weekend. Podcast will be up on Sunday. Don't forget to go to the YouTube channel and subscribe there, and I will see you next week.
So I have a question on posterior pelvic orientations and how they arise, whether it's something that can happen immediately or if other compensations or something else has to occur in order for that to happen later. My suspicion is potentially that if you lose like an early propulsive position, you then have to compensate with the pelvis in order to get the ER space. But I was interested to hear what you thought.
Okay. So think about this for a sec. If I don't have relative motion and I am walking across the ground, am I still having to create a delay strategy?
For sure.
Okay. So if the pelvis is locked into one piece, and let's make this really like crazy simple. So I have an ER representation because I'm a narrow ISA person. Okay. Mm-hmm. I'm walking through space, but I don't have relative motion in the pelvis. Where would it most likely show up that I would be able to create a delay strategy? I can't do it in the pelvis, right? Where would it be easier for me to do that? Huh?
Lumbar spine.
Yeah, there you go. Right. So puff out the lumbar spine in a delay strategy for me, right? Create the parachute just above the pelvis. And if I move the spine into that expanded representation, where do you think the pelvis is going to go? Because it's attached to it.
It's going to go with it.
Well, so the top of the pelvis is going to, from a relative position standpoint, the top of the pelvis would be more posterior than the bottom part of the pelvis under that circumstance, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, okay. And so where would you see this represented in a really easy way to visualize it? Do you know?
I'm not sure I get the question.
Where would you see posterior orientation of a pelvis visually represented in a complex activity? Where would be an easy place to be?
Like a squat.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You'll see it in a squat. You'll see it in a squat. And so that's one of the values of having people do complex movements is that that's their tell. It's like, so if I see somebody that posteriorly orients a pelvis and I see the expansion in the lumbar area as they descend into the squat, guess what strategy they're most likely going to use when they don't have full relative motions in the pelvis as they're walking? You see it?
Mm-hmm.
And then if you know that, and let's just say you threw them up on a table and you're doing table tests, what would you expect the external rotation in the hip to look like under those circumstances?
It would be poor.
It would be what?
You wouldn't have a lot.
Where? Let's be really
specific. Okay. You would have a lot of hip, but you get a lot of compensation.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
A lot of ER, no IR.
There you go. That's exactly right. So you see somebody, they squat, you see the expansion in the lumbar area, and you're going, this is not going to be somebody that has a lot of typical early propulsive capabilities. So their early propulsion has moved up. It moved up into the lumbar spine. There's their delay strategy.
So you get people who walk in and look blatantly posteriorly oriented, and you get people who walk in and look blatantly anteriorly oriented. And I feel like you can get the same table measures in regards to ER and IR in that circumstance.
Yes. Yes, you can, because they move.
Right. Are they still using that same lumbar spine delay strategy when they walk in that circumstance, just at relatively different positions of the spine?
Well, so think about how many movable segments of the spine you got to play with here, but it will not be the same because, okay, so if I had a narrow versus a wide ISA representation, and let's just say you threw them down on the table, they roll all over the table as you're measuring them. And so the measurements appear to be the same, right? They're still turning, right? It just might not be to the same degree nor the same place. So if somebody, and we'll just use an extreme example, if somebody decides that they're going to herniate L4-5 on the left side as their delay strategy, that might be somebody that doesn't have the ability to create the turn. So they're so far forward that their turn comes from there. Whereas you have somebody that might not be as far forward that does still have that turning capability as you move them through space. Because remember, you're displacing the load of the limbs that will cause some of these turns to take place. Right? Remember, we always talk about the difference between a straight leg raise and then traditional hip flexion ER/IR measures. And because of the position that you're in, this is where you start to get the pelvic turning, the pelvis turning as you perform the measures. So it's not the same strategy per se.
Yeah. Okay. So is the solution then to go get some ER space first? And then does that just create a positional change of the lumbar spine and you don't have to worry about the posture, so to speak?
Did you see the air quotes, Grace? Alex just used air quotes.
Does that save me from using the word posture?
This is protection. Maybe. So if you recapture relative motions in the pelvis, so that's what you're saying when you say recapture ER space, you're talking about recapturing relative motions in the pelvis. So let's just say we got somebody that is oriented. The pelvis orientation is an external rotation representation with compression, so they don't have relative motions. So they're using a lumbar spine compensatory strategy as their delay. So there's our starting conditions. Okay, you do some form of activity, you restore relative motions in the pelvis. Chances are, assuming no other constraint changes are in play, chances are you will also normalize the behavior of the lumbar spine in its association with the pelvis. Okay, if you don't, then you have another issue to address. But it like I said, typically, if you're able to capture relative motions, you're going to get the associated behavior change in the lumbar spine as well. But you have all sorts of, like, if you don't get that change, like if you don't recapture relative motion, in the pelvis. Now you say, well, I might need to influence this thing from the lumbar spine to get the relative motions to behave appropriately, right? So now you got to start thinking of a position where I can move the spine from its delay strategy to a late representation of propulsion to create a turn in the lumbar spine and then bring the pelvis along with it. Have you ever seen anybody manipulate a lumbar spine and the patient gets up and they go, oh, that feels so much better?
Yeah.
There you go. You're thinking.
Yeah, I'm processing. Yeah, okay. Yeah. But you'd still have to go then cement it with some other, like if you don't go access some ER space after that at the pelvis, you'll probably just bring them straight back into the same position. So it's just symptomatic relief.
Absolutely it is, right? So you get the temporary expansion of adaptability through the manually applied technique, but I didn't recapture enough relative motion systemically, right, to get as they say, the changes to stick.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you do get temporary relief. So you're on the right track as far as the intention is concerned, which is adaptability. But did you recapture the adaptability? But this is why you intervene and then retest, so you can tell what happened, right? Just feeling better is not the full resolution in some cases. Right? Again, all you do is expand adaptability. If I expand adaptability, but it goes in the wrong direction, they might feel better. But did I really provide a solution if full relative motion is the goal?
Right.
Remember, your outcomes are just outcomes. They're just telling you what happened under the circumstance. You try to take the emotion out of it, so to speak, where you get to pat yourself on the back for being successful and just understand it's like, okay, I didn't get relative motion in the pelvis, but maybe I expanded it in the lumbar spine. Well, how would you know? Well, that's why you measure your measures. And just like you said, you get a lot of ER, no IR, you get the spinal compensatory strategy still in play.
Gotcha. Okay. Very cool. Thank you.